Okay. So we are going to, like I said, wrap up the digestive system. Now, I came across this slide. I thought maybe this is actually a pretty good slide to go over, uh, kind of reviewing digestion. So we'll just do this really, really quickly. Remember, we talked about digestion is a process where you're breaking down food into the smallest possible units, um, and that would be simple sugars. That would be things like amino acids, and that would be breaking down fats into things like fatty acid. I mean, you don't need to worry about that. Just understand that when you eat something, what you're trying to do is you're trying to break down the food that you're eating into really, really small units that you could absorb in your small intestine. Okay. So remember last time we talked about the small intestine is the most important organ in all of this. This is where you're going to get, uh, you know, most digestion, and this is where you're going to absorb nutrients. So let me see if you can actually see that. So this is where you're going to get most of your digestion and and this is going to get all of your absorption. Okay, so you cannot live without your small intestine. It's really, 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 really important. Now, there are lots of chemicals involved. We didn't really spend a whole lot of time on this. Um, so don't worry about that. You'll learn more about that in grade 11. Okay. So what we did is we kind of just gave like a really simple overview of how it works. Remember, food comes in through your mouth, and you have your salivary glands, which are going to help break up food, but the act of chewing breaks it up into small pieces, and that we talked about last time is important because the when you make the food small, it gets digested quickly. All right, there's a connection there between surface area and reaction rate. That food goes down your stomach, sorry, down into your stomach through the esophagus, and then in here you have some digestion, specifically protein digestion through an enzyme called pepsin, which you can see here. All right, so you're going to get some digestion there. The food sits in your stomach, and then eventually, what happens is it enters your small intestine, which is actually quite long. Again, this is where you get most of your digestion and all of your absorption. And then whatever doesn't get digested ends up going into your large intestine. And this is where we have that beneficial bacteria that eats up things that you can't digest, but gives you vitamin K. But it does also reabsorb some water, which is important. And, whatever then isn't digested or absorbed gets, pooped out, right? We did not talk too much about the organs that help. So, just really, really quickly, we have the liver and we have the pancreas, and they actually help out in this process. Specifically, the liver makes something called bile, which is stored in this thing called the gallbladder. And that actually helps break up the fats because it acts like a detergent. Which, if you ever have like a grease stain on clothing, you need to use. You can't use just water to break it up because water won't break up. Water and fat don't mix. So bile actually helps break up fat. Again, why you want to break up something is because the smaller it is, the easier it is to digest it. And the pancreas also secretes chemicals. Actually, secretes a lot of chemicals. So it's actually another really, really important organ. You can see here a whole list of chemicals that are released into the small intestine. You can see actually in this drawing that there's actually a connection between the pancreas and the small intestine. You can see there's a little like tube that connects pancreas to the small intestine. So the pancreas dumps in a bunch of chemicals. Actually, one of the things that also, and this I should mention this. This is actually kind of cool because it relates to what we talked about in chemistry. Is a chemical called bicarbonate. Oop, oh, what happened? Just disappeared. So where is that? Okay, let's highlight that. Actually, let me just erase this for a second. And get my pen. All right. So not only does it release a lot of digestive chemicals, but it also releases something called bicarbonate, which kind of makes sense because remember the stomach has a lot of strong acid in it, and it has mucus to protect itself. But the small intestine can't have that same protection because it wouldn't make any sense for it to do that because its job is to absorb things. So by nature, it has to have thin membranes that are delicate for things to pass through it. So what happens is that very strong acidic stuff that comes out of the stomach, that has to be neutralized. Otherwise, it would actually literally digest the small intestine. So your pancreas not only does it dump in chemicals to help break up food, and you can see the chemicals color coded here. Again, you don't need to know them. We'll learn more about them in grade 11. But it also releases bicarbonate so that you neutralize the acid. So that's actually acid-base reaction. Okay. Anyway, so that's what we talked about for the most part last time, the overview of the digestive system. Today I want to go over like some conditions or diseases, but also talk maybe a little bit about diet, just a little bit. Okay. With some questions. No, you don't need to worry about the names of the enzymes. Okay, because you're not, like I said, you're not getting any more tests or quizzes. You might come across questions about enzyme names because I know Slippets has put up some work for you, but in terms of me testing you on that, I wouldn't worry about it. Okay, I just want you to get the overall picture as to what's happening. So let's look at some conditions. So, for example, IBD, which stands for inflammatory bowel disease, is a condition that actually covers two things. One is something called Crohn's disease, which is here. Ooh, my pen's not working. Okay. Which is here, and UC or ulcerative colitis. Now they're similar. You can see that they have a lot of overlapping symptoms, so there's a lot of similarity between the two. But there is a big difference. In Crohn's disease, we're talking about pretty much your entire digestive system could be affected. Whereas in ulcerative colitis, it's pretty much limited to the large intestine or the colon. So in terms of where they affect the body, there's a difference there between the two. You can actually see it highlighted here, where it says Crohn's disease can be in any part of the digestive tract, whereas in ulcerative colitis is just the last part. Okay. Now, what happens is this is an inflammatory response. That means your own immune system attacks the organs. So your immune system is supposed to protect you, but sometimes it actually works against you. And when your immune system attacks you, that is obviously not a good thing. So in this case, and there are some examples of your immune system attacking itself. Like, for example, type 1 diabetes is actually your own immune system attacking part of your pancreas. In IBD, it's your own immune system causing havoc in your digestive system. Now you can see here on the left what a normal colon would look like, and on the right, someone with UC. So you can, I don't know if you can see the resolution on your screen, but you can see these little lesions, these areas of where it looks like almost like blood's coming through, because one of the symptoms in UC is you're getting blood with your stool. Okay. Again, this is an immune response that's obviously I don't have this condition. I have a friend who has it. It's not a fun experience. Okay. Then you have something like celiac disease. This is in response to an intolerance to gluten. So this is a surprising number of things that actually have gluten in it. Um, and now they have, well, they advertise a lot of things that, like, that's actually one of the things people will advertise now is this is gluten free. Why is that important? Because obviously it's a huge market, so there must be a large percentage of the population that can't tolerate gluten. So there's good market for this. So what happens is this is a reaction to the gluten protein. Here are some of the symptoms. Again, you don't need to memorize it. I'm just going over some of these. What happens in celiac disease? I was tested for this. I came back negative, which means I don't have it. But we know that your small intestine absorbs nutrients. And remember, the villi are they have these folds. Remember, the villi look like this, and that gives it lots of surface area to absorb nutrients. Right. The job of the villi is to absorb nutrients. So this is normal on the left. Someone with celiac disease, you can see that their villi look like they've been almost leveled, which obviously would mean a reduction in the surface area for absorption, which means you're getting less nutrients when you eat something. Okay, so that's celiac disease. Lactose intolerance. This came up last time. That's another condition, fairly common. This graph actually shows you areas of where it's very common. You can see that regions of dark blue indicate most of the population, almost all the population, is lactose intolerant. You got large parts of South America. Looks like almost all of Africa. It looks like South Asia. Central and South Asia. Um, looks like there's a high degree of lactose intolerance. Now, what is this? Talked about this last time. So this is when you're missing an enzyme to break down lactose. So actually, if we go back to this slide, in your small intestine, you are going to produce, or you're going to get. We talked about enzymes are going to get dumped in there from the pancreas to help break up nutrients into the smallest possible units. One of those enzymes is lactase. That's if you're lactose tolerant. If you're not, if you're lactose intolerant, you stop making that enzyme. So what happens then is the lactose doesn't get broken down. So lactose is a sugar, and it's commonly found in milk. Now, if you can't break it down, what happens is that sugar ends up going into your large intestine. Because remember, if you don't absorb it in your small intestine, then it goes into your large intestine. And then bacteria will break it down. But when they break it down, they produce like lots of gas, and it's very, very uncomfortable. So what you can do then is you could take like supplements. Basically, these are digestive enzymes, lactase. You can take that as a supplement to help break down the lactose. Or you can, if you like milk, you can just drink lactose-free milk. That's they sell that, pretty much in all stores now. Now, don't confuse lactose intolerance with milk allergy. Okay, this is different. This is caused because they're in milk. Not only does milk have sugar, but it has fat and it has protein. And in this case, the allergy is to the protein in milk. So that's not the same as lactose intolerance. Lactose intolerance would not be life-threatening, be very uncomfortable. But whereas a milk allergy, like any allergy, could lead to, anaphylactic shock if it's really, really severe. Hold on, question. Okay. Hold on. Now, yeah, I'm not sure of your question, Medea. Is that how you say the name? Your name, Medea? Medi. Is it Medi? Yeah, I'm not sure of the question that you're asking. Okay. Now, in terms of, again, I just want to give you like a few examples of conditions or diseases. In terms of like nutrition, I'm not gonna advertise anything because when it comes to diet, I don't know much. I'll be honest with you. In fact, what I'm gonna say to you is that as I've gotten older, I know less. Okay. A lot of the things that I thought were true when I was younger ended up being not so true. You're going to experience this. What you thought was true as a kid, you realize later, maybe mommy was not telling me the whole truth. Like I'm sure a lot of you were told it's cold outside, you go outside and you're not wearing appropriate clothes, you catch a cold, right? You don't catch a cold from temperature, catch a cold from a virus. So it's not technically true. A lot of things that we learned when we were younger that, we're not really sure if they're true. So how do you know if something is true? Okay. So you could listen to people and they can tell you something and you might believe that's true, but doesn't make it true. Okay. So here's a nice pyramid that's showing you, how do you figure out if something is scientifically true? Right? At the bottom of this pyramid would be things like individual reports. That would be like someone going on YouTube saying, "Oh, I ate this diet or I had this diet and this diet cured me of this and I lost a whole bunch of weight on this diet." That is very weak evidence. That's at the bottom of the pyramid. If you want to know if something is true, what you need to know or look for are studies. So as you go up the pyramid, what you start to see at the top are studies, things called controlled trials, and at the very top is something called a meta-analysis. Let me explain what a cohort study is. A cohort study is when you follow like a group of people, and then you see, let's say, for example, you follow smokers for a long period of time, and then you realize in this group that they have a higher rate of lung cancer. Okay, that's a cohort study. You follow a group and you to see if, whatever, there's maybe a higher chance of them getting a particular disease. A randomized control trial is a step above that. This is when let's say you want to learn about lung cancer and if smoking affects it. What you do is you take your groups, you split them up into what's called a control group, and the other group is the one you're going to be comparing them to. And what you do is you would assign. Now this is how do I? So I don't know. You wouldn't be able to do this with smoking, okay? But here's the idea. The idea is, let's actually talk about maybe, for example, like a drug. Let's say you want to see if a drug works, okay? So what you do is you take a group, split them in two, and you give them a drug. So you give one group the drug, and you give the control group something that they think is the drug, but it's not the drug. Okay, maybe it's like a Tic Tac. Okay, but they think in their head it's a drug, right? That's a randomized control trial because they don't really know what they're getting. They think they're getting the drug, but they're not really sure. And then what you see in the end is if there's a difference between the two groups. Okay, now we can't do that with smoking because that would be unethical. What are you going to do? You're going to randomly give people cigarettes and see if they get cancer. And so obviously that's not a good thing. A meta-analysis is when you have lots of studies that you look at to see what is the overall scientific truth. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if we want to know, for example, something like whether eating certain things cause cancer, like for example, eating meat, eating fish, eating dairy. What you want to do is you don't want to necessarily look at one study. You want to look at many studies. You want to know what's the overall finding. So, for example, here it says that you know uh, major finding includes eating red meat raises the risk of cancer in your colon. Okay, whereas eating or consuming dairy would decrease the risk of cancer in your colon. You could look at other studies. For example, here, this is looking at um, different things. For example, here, milk and cancer. It says here, we cannot prove that dairy products cause disease. What is the bottom line with colorectal cancer? Most studies, not one study, we're looking at many studies, suggest that consuming dairy is linked to reduced risk of colorectal cancer. But other studies say something like this. Increasing dairy consumption could increase the risk of prostate cancer. Now, as women, you don't have to worry about that, but men do, right? So here's another one with stomach, no clear evidence. Sometimes the studies come back with there is no evidence. What I'm trying to tell you is when you want to know whether or not a diet works, don't just go on YouTube and look at somebody's story and it seems convincing. You need to look at studies, and you don't need to look at one study. You probably got to look at many studies to see what's actually true. And that's not easy because often we jump to conclusions. That's our nature. So here's one. I'll just give you an example of one, okay? Now, and because we're told this in school, we have lots of meetings about this. Learning styles. Okay. So, how many of you believe that if you were to get material presented to you in the learning style of your choice, so like learning style being like a visual learner versus an auditory learner, whatever. If you were to get material presented to you in the learning style of your choice, that you would do better when being tested on that material. I mean, you all have heard of learning styles. We're all brought up with this concept of learning style, right? So that's the claim. Now, what's interesting is, if you ask children and adults, they will say, yeah, we would like to be presented material in the form that we prefer, right? So, if I'm a visual learner, I'm going to want to see it. If I'm an auditory learner, I'm going to want to hear it, right? Now, what's interesting is the studies that came back that looked at this found no evidence that this works. Now, think about that. This is something that you've probably all heard of. Your teachers have talked to you about this. Learning styles, right? Probably even been assessed about learning styles. And I'm not saying that there's no such thing as learning styles, but there is evidence that it might not be as effective a tool at trying to figure out the best way to deliver information to kids. And that's something that if you look up learning styles, there's lots of stuff on learning styles. And yet the evidence is unclear as to whether or not it's effective. So if we're not sure about that, then how can we be sure about things like diet, where it seems like with diet, it's all over the place? So for example, if I look at this slide on the left versus the right, okay, on the left, you have, now I'm sure you've heard of a vegan diet. Anyone you heard of a vegan diet? you know what a vegan diet is? So this is when you don't get any food from animal sources. So not even cheese, for example. Okay. Oh, let's see something. Okay, that's okay. So vegetarian and vegan there's a overlap between the two, but a vegetarian, could have animal byproduct. Like if I remember, if I know this, if I'm pretty sure or confident, my answer is that a vegetarian can also have like cheese, if I remember correctly. Whereas a vegan won't have that because cheese comes from animals. All right. On the left is an example of carnivore diet. Now, yes, carnivore diet. You can look this up. There are some people that follow this. All right. Now they claim that it works for them. People will say that, well, I've lost weight on it. Um, I was having problems. I was having, anti-inflammatory, or I was having, sorry, my immune system was attacking my own body. I wasn't feeling good. And now I go on a carnivore diet and I feel great. But the funny thing is that if you look at vegans, they'll say the same thing. Oh, I'm on a vegan diet. I feel great. I don't have any issues. So you're like, hold on, what's going on here? Because these are like opposite ends of the spectrum. How could they both be feeling better, losing weight? What's going on? Again, you need to know, like, you have to look at the studies. You can't just look at an individual person and say, oh, I only eat meat, I feel great. Oh, or I only eat things that don't come from animals and I feel great. You have to look at all the overall evidence. Now, if I look at the overall evidence, it does suggest that a vegan diet is pretty healthy. For example, heart disease rates lower, total cancer rates lower. Um, so it seems like it's a pretty healthy diet. I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like it's a pretty healthy diet. There's a lot less information on carnivore diet, so I'm not really as confident as to um, I'm not really as confident as to how effective the carnivore diet is. I think we're going to need more information on that one. So I can't really say anything right now at this point. Although I must admit, I'm definitely not a vegan. I do enjoy meat. I don't eat a lot of meat, but I do enjoy it. One last thing. This is important too. Going back to this whole idea of, if you really want to know the truth, don't just look at one YouTube video clip. You have to look at studies, probably many studies, to see what's the most consistent answer. So for the longest time, I remember when I was a kid, they told us to reduce your fat intake. That was the idea back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Reduce your fat intake because we think that if you take in too much fat, you're gonna, you're at more risk for certain diseases. For example, like cardiovascular disease. Turned out when people did reduce their fat intake, the risk of disease or incidence of disease actually went up. So what's going on here? So if you look at the second point, it says when saturated fat was deemed harmful, the industry produced low-fat products. You obviously see this often advertised in stores, low-fat products. But the problem is with these low-fat products, they often put a lot of other stuff in it. So they basically replace the calories from fat with other things. Now, what happened was then people were reducing the fat intake, but they were getting calories from other things that actually, in the end, caused more disease. And, like, for example, diabetes rates went up. So, we have to know a lot of information to make, to know the scientific truth as to what's going on. So we got fat wrong for the longest time. The idea was low fat, low fat, low fat. It's not necessarily like that. You should not just eliminate fat from your diet. I think that's sort of important. Right now, there's a whole thing about sugar. How much sugar should we be taking in? And I think it seems like most of the evidence says that you should limit your sugar, that sugar is kind of an evil thing. Well, I shouldn't say the word evil, but it causes a lot of harm. Because when people started reducing their fat intake, what happened was the increase of sugar intake. Because at the end of the day, the food got to be tasty. So what happened was more sugar was being consumed by the population, and that led to things like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, even though fat intake dropped. So right now there's a whole thing about sugar. Should we be reducing sugars? It seems like the consensus is, yeah, we should reduce it. Specifically, one of the sugars that was targeted was something called fructose. Okay. Now, according to a study, a meta-analysis study, it seems that the biggest problem is actually and this was interesting. So what they're saying is that yeah, if you drink fructose containing sugars, you can get, there is, weight gain. Yeah, for sure. There's things like cardiovascular issues, diseases that increase, but that's if you have too much of it. Okay. If you can control the calories, according to this meta-analysis, that fructose does not appear to cause issues. Okay, not appear to cause issues. However, what's really interesting is they go on to say in this meta-analysis, remember, meta-analysis is like a review of many studies. So it's really like on top of the pyramid. They say that a big issue is people drinking. So it's, at the end of the thing, it says SSBS right here. So what's that? Those are sugar sweetened beverages. If I remember, that's what it stands for. Sugar sweetened beverages. So these are drinks that contain sugar in them. So apparently, the meta-analysis came back with a finding that people who drink a lot of sugary beverages are at a higher risk of things like obesity, cardiovascular disease, and things like diabetes. That was an interesting finding. So again, my take-home message, very long-winded take-home message is: if you want to know the truth, don't watch Harry's YouTube channel on carnivore diet or veganism. Look at the studies, look at many studies to see what is the overall scientific consensus, and then go from there. Okay? All right. So let me stop recording, and I'll take any questions.